So in my imagination, when I'm driving along looking for the Harbeth factory, I am, in my imagination, looking for some huge company with the big flashing lights. What I found was one old man working in a tiny little shed, hand-making loudspeakers. And I thought, this can't be right. This man is one of the most famous audio engineers in the world. And I knocked on the window because he was asleep in his chair. And suddenly he came to life and said, who are you? I don't have visitors. And I said, who are you selling these speakers to? And he said, well, I sell my speakers to Japan and Hong Kong and Korea and Singapore. And because I was working for a Japanese company at the time, I thought, if he can sell these handmade speakers to Japan and China, they must be very good indeed. So I drove home to my wife and I said, I am going to buy a speaker company. And she said, I'll just remind you of one thing. We have 2 children and we have to pay for our house. But if you think you can make a success of this, go for it.
他是29岁，然后辞去了在公司的工作，开始自己去做音响方面的生意。
Now the next step was really incredibly lucky because I said to Mr. Harwood, well, no, I had a slight panic, actually, because I suddenly realized that I'd given up, or was about to give up, a big job in a large corporation for this hobby business. So as I shut the door on the vehicle that I was I wanted to move all the simple equipment near to my house. So I hired a van, and as I loaded in the equipment, I shut the door and I locked it, and I turned to Mr. Harwood and said, will you be my consultant? And he said, no. I am 75 years old. I am retired. I'm finished. I'm just going to look after my garden. And I suddenly realized I was on my own. So where do you start as a now professional loudspeaker designer when last week you were a hobby amateur loudspeaker designer? Well, I was very lucky. When I was in my teens, that is about 14 years old, the BBC built a new local radio station in the nearby town. Now, bear in mind, I was only about 14 or so years old. And these were the days before security, before terrorists, before the bad people came along. And all the young people used to listen to this program called Trend on a Saturday lunchtime. It was made by teenagers for teenagers. So there was one week there was a request. The producer said, please, we need more young people to come to the studio to help to make the program because I am busy. I cannot do this on my own. If you want this program to continue, you must come and help make it. So I went and I knocked on the door and I said, I'm here to volunteer. And the producer said, you and you and you, great, come in. So at this 14 years old, I am now a Saturday volunteer inside a BBC studio. So for the first few weeks, you are given very simple work. But after you become part of the regular crowd, the regular gang, and your face is familiar, or your hair color is familiar, or whatever, you start getting more important little jobs. So the studios were in two parts. There was the broadcaster, the disc jockey was in this side through the glass wall, and this side was the control room. So normally I would be in the control room watching the sound engineers doing their work, but after I became more accepted, I was given tasks to take, for example, a record, a gramophone record, or a script or something, from the control room, down the corridor, and into the studio. And this was really interesting because I could hear the voice of the disc jockey or the presenter live when I was in the studio, and I could hear his reproduced voice over the monitor loudspeaker in the control room. And the comparison, I thought, was really interesting. It was similar, but it wasn't the same. And one day I was in the control room and the chief engineer was standing next to me, and I said to him, "Tell me something about these BBC monitor speakers." And he said, "That is the product of our famous Mr. Harwood." And he said, "Come to my office. I have many papers written by Harwood about the design of BBC speakers." And 16 years later, I was owning the Harbeth company. About my formative experience of listening to the reproduced voice and the real voice and getting curious about why these were not exactly the same. Why was there a difference? So when Mr. Harwood said, "I'm not interested in being your consultant," he said, "Because you already have the tools to carry on speaker design." If we attended a conference of loudspeaker designers and there were 100 loudspeaker designers in the room and the presenter said, "Please put your hand up to tell me what type of audio material you use to design your loudspeakers," you would get a range of answers. If he said, "Please put your hand up if you are using pop music to design your loudspeakers," probably 90 hands out of the 100 would go up. Jazz music, there'd be quite a few hands. Classical music, there'd be fewer and fewer, unfortunately. And then we're down to a critical 1 or 2 hands, including mine. As Harwood reminded me, the first musical instrument was invented only about 50,000 years ago. But the human ear has been developing for about 20 million years. 50,000 years is not enough generations to have made this system particularly tuned to musical interpretation. So this auditory system is expert at interpreting, understanding, analyzing human speech. So if the presenter said, "I don't suppose any of you designers actually use human speech to validate your design," I would put my hand up and say, absolutely, it is the critical, the most important tool that you can use. So how would we do this in practice? Okay, you are, unfortunately, my granddaughter for the purpose of this. So we go outside, free from reflections and free from aircraft and police cars and all the noises, and we put a really, really good microphone in front of you, and I stand back and I say, "Just tell me about your school days." And you talk. You talk for 5 minutes about your school days. We could pick anybody in the room. It doesn't actually matter who the person is. In fact, it would be good to have a young male and female voice and a mature male and female voice. It doesn't matter. The quality of the microphone is very, very important. It has to be perfect. Okay, so we've now made the recording and we're in the laboratory and we're curious about how good our new prototype design is. So what we do is we take the voice and we ask the voice to sit there, please. Yes. And we put up a black curtain here so that we cannot see through the curtain. And we ask the voice, the real person, tell us again about your school days. And this side of the curtain, we listen very, very carefully to the live voice. And then we say, okay, stop. Now we will play the pre-recorded voice. And we get a bit of a shock because it's very, very, very difficult to make the reproduced voice sound like the real voice. And there are many reasons for that, but I'll give you one fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is that this voice is coming from one place. If we look at a loudspeaker, we'll take this one for example, this voice is now spread over 3 sources. And if it's a two-way loudspeaker like this one here, or the top half of this one, we're projecting 2 beams of sound at the listener, which is completely different conceptually to one voice with one point source. So we're asking our brain, our subconscious brain, to recombine totally isolated sound beams and to fuse those together in our brain as if we were listening to the original sound. It's really quite surprising that we can, as humans, we can accept reproduced sound at all, because this is so fundamentally different to the point source that is the natural voice. And before we play some more music, there is the second crippling problem, and that is that the ear canal, the small tube from the outer ear down to the ear drum, is about that long. And that is a quarter wavelength at about 3.5 kilohertz. And 3.5 kilohertz is where most two-way loudspeakers cross over. Evolution has optimized this canal, this tube, to put a very large peak in the ear's sensitivity around about 3.5 kilohertz. And the reason for that is the ear, of course, was designed to detect predators, preventing lions and tigers and so on creeping up on us. And the boost in the ear's sensitivity is so that if a twig or a stick or some impulsive sound is detected behind us, we are wired to turn around immediately to detect what is creeping up on us. And this peak is about 10 decibels in the ear sensitivity. It is the worst possible frequency to choose for combining a mid-range unit and a tweeter. There is no worse frequency. But we are trapped as loudspeakers designers because we can't operate the bass unit any further up in frequency. We can't operate the tweeter any further down in frequency. So we're in this compromise region where we're trying to get a sound that's natural despite all the problems that we face. If you use music as a test source, you can tolerate a much higher disturbance of the integration of these drive units. But as soon as you play speech, you can hear immediately the problems.